Right now, the government gives us IDs, driver's license, passport, social security numbers, and others. They're separate. You lose your license, you can still pay your bills. You can still go and buy groceries. So each card controls one door, not the whole damn house. Now picture one digital ID that holds every single key you have: your bank account, your health records, your travel, your phone, your ability to move and to operate. At first, you'll think, oh, well, this is convenient. One key for everything. No more passwords, no more fraud. But what happens when someday somebody else holds that key? They don't just control one door now, do they? No, they control your entire life. One click, boom, lights out. No money, no travel, no gas, no access. That is not an ID. That is a leash. And you are the dog. Please think on this. The entire future of the human race is depending on you to refuse digital ID. And here's how they're doing it in Italy. Massive protests are shaking Italy as citizens from both left and right unite against the government's mandatory digital ID wallet plan. Millions have refused to pay taxes and have called a general strike until the government abandons the European Union's forced digital ID rollout, which is set to be mandatory by 2026. Mainstream media, silent. But Italy has spoken loud and clear. We will not be controlled. Could this be the spark that spreads across Europe and across the world? There are two very clear choices now. We either rise up together in our millions and say no, or we follow China's example where one by one they have submitted in their millions to full control from the government. Welcome to you all. I think this is really the most important interview I've ever done, because the world is hovering on the brink of one giant boot on our collective necks, trying to silence our collective voices. So we've just come out of that saying the entire future of the human race is depending on you to refuse digital ID. Welcome Catherine Austin-Fitz, Alex Newman and Andrew Bridgen from the UK. Catherine, why is that statement so true, and why is it so important right now that every single person, especially the young parents, look in on this interview and watch the whole discussion today? Why is it so important right now?
Digital ID is a fundamental piece of putting into place train tracks that give, on a centralized basis, total financial transaction control. So our transactions stop being something that we can freely do as we choose and are completely under a surveillance and tracking system and can literally control us each individually in very fine-tooth ways. So you can literally say, I don't want you eating real meat, you can only eat lab-grown meat, or I don't want you being able to go to a pub and drink, or the lockdowns are here and I don't want you leaving your house, so your money won't work if you leave your house. So we're talking about complete authoritarian control. We've lived in a world, Liz, where the central bankers control monetary policy, but not fiscal policy. And that's what so Alex and I are in the United States, that's what the Revolutionary War was fought about, taxation with or without representation. And now you're talking about the central bankers literally being able to replace legislative representatives in the executive branch and have complete control of fiscal policy through the money and literally put everybody in a digital concentration camp.
So let's just tease that out. Monetary policy is all about the credit that's given to people, and fiscal is about the tax, is it not?
Right. So it's running the currency. And you have to understand, this is not a change in the currency. Every 80 to 120 years, the central banks put us through a reset of the currency system. And often when that reset happens, you evolve or you move the currency. And we are in a reset. But the thing about digital technology is it allows them to end currency completely and go to a state that Patrick Wood calls technocracy. So complete control by rule systems. You don't need markets, you don't need currency, you don't have any liquidity, you just go to total control. And the reality is that total control is being implemented in a world where, as we see from the pandemic, the leadership believes that they can engineer much longer lives for themselves, and they want a much smaller population, particularly with automation. So we've certainly seen that in the UK with what happened, not just with the shots, but with euthanasia, and what's happened to the elderly. We're seeing it in America too. So unfortunately, we're talking about giving unprecedented powers, the likes of which the world has never seen, to people who really do want to depopulate us.
And who really want all of it for themselves. I mean, the head of the Bank of International Settlements looks like Mr. Creosote in Monty Python. If you've ever seen him, he looks bloated, beyond bloated.
He looks more like Jabba the Hutt, actually, doesn't he?
At least we can still...
I have to say something nice about Augustine Carson's, because it was the first time in my life. So we have a great list of short videos. I love 1 minute or less videos to show to policymakers. And we have that great 59-second video of Augustine Carson saying we can make the rules and we can enforce them centrally. And that was the first time that I'd ever seen a central banker tell the truth, in plain language. And I almost fell off my chair, and we clipped it and have sent it everywhere. But he's one of the few guys on the world stage who's telling you he wants complete control.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
I very much recommend your short clips on Solari.com, and we'll put the links here. They are worth every parent, everybody who wants a good future for their children to look at. Alex Newman, what's your reaction when you hear what Catherine said there in the opening salvo?
Well, I agree, obviously, with everything that Catherine said. They are trying to build a digital prison, a digital gulag, the likes of which the world has never seen. Now, even if these were wonderful, well-intentioned people, that would be a really bad idea, right? Just giving anybody this kind of control is a recipe for disaster. But then you factor in what Catherine alluded to. We know stuff about these people. We know what they believe. They believe there are too many of us on this planet, as Catherine pointed out. They believe we have too much privacy. They believe we have too much freedom. They believe that we shouldn't be eating meat if we're allowed to eat anything at all. They don't believe we should be able to educate our own children. They believe we should lose freedoms that until recent years we didn't even think of as freedoms that needed to be defended. And I encourage everybody to just remember back a few years ago. You couldn't go to your work if you were non-essential, which was most people. You could not go visit your grandma as she was dying in the hospital. You couldn't go to church, but you could go riot. So these megalomaniacs, the best thing you can say about them is that they're psychopaths. They have some sort of mental problem that makes them a threat, not just to themselves, but to all of us. I would argue that it's even worse than psychopathy. I believe there's a very real case to be made here that these people are under demonic influence, if you will. There's something that just makes them hate humanity, hate life, hate God. And so to give that kind of power, I mean, that's like giving a nuclear bomb to a mass murderer, a chainsaw murder. It's the most dangerous thing you can contemplate. And when you realize all the different things that they'll be able to control with these digital IDs and these digital currencies, and to go back to Agustin Carstens for a minute, he actually talked, I've got a video of him where he's talking about the unified digital blockchain ledger, where every asset in the universe will be tokenized, and you'll only be able to interact with that with your digital ID and your central bank digital currency. They'll be able to shut off any person in the world from being able to interact with society. This is probably the worst idea that a person could think of, and yet we're being stampeded into it as we speak. We all just saw the British Prime Minister come out and say, you're not going to be able to work if you won't take this digital ID. It's rolling out even here in the United States. I can't emphasize strongly enough that we must fight this with every fiber of our being, like our very lives depend on it.
Because they do. Andrew,
right.
You've been a leader in the UK in pushing back against Starmer's tyrannical overreach. Tell us where the petition is at. Do you know the numbers that have signed that petition in the UK? And just give us an overview of the UK at the moment, a snapshot. What's happening there?
No, it's nearly 3 million. I think actually they switched it off at about 2.85 million because it had got there in a matter of days, and they normally run for 6 months. But I think it was switched off because it was just too embarrassing for the government. I think I agree with what Alex and Catherine have said. It's been clear to me for quite some time that the social model selected by the world's elites behind the scenes is the Chinese social credit score system. They've decided that's the desirable social model for the world, and our governments around the world are in lockstep once again, implementing a policy which they've never sold to the people. It wasn't in their manifestos. It's just being implemented surreptitiously. I think if we can stop digital ID, that means that basic Agenda 2030 can't happen, can't be inflicted upon us without digital ID. There'd be no carbon credit scoring allowances. There'll be no central bank digital currencies or tokens. And I've been very clear from the beginning. I've told people that this is so important. If you say yes to digital ID, you'll never be able to say no to the government ever again. And you'd have to trust this government, it's the most unpopular government we've ever had in the UK in record time. But not only this government, you'll have to trust future governments that you don't know who's going to be running those governments. And you'd be giving away your freedoms. Not only your own freedoms. There's no way out of digital ID. It's a trap, and it's always easier to avoid a trap than get out of it once you're in it. I don't think there's any way out of it once you're in it. They'll have so much power over us. And you'll be condemning not only your children, grandchildren, but future generations of our nations yet unborn to effectively digital slavery. And they'll never know the freedoms that we gave away. And they're not our freedoms to give away for future generations. And this is the hill, I'm afraid, another hill we have to stand on and fight on.
And this is the one to be prepared to die on. I said to a young woman the other day, you will have to be prepared to sacrifice things, to sacrifice convenience and ease if you want freedom for your children. So I'm going to ask everybody at this point, please repost this interview to at least 100 people, because the government is already censoring many of us and trying to shadow ban. I know, Andrew, you have a lot of that. So if you repost it personally, it gets around the shadow banning a little bit. Thank you for doing that. So, Andrew, you posted the little children that we saw at the opening here, all with a QR code, as if they are a barcoded item in a shop, all waiting for mandatory vaccinations. If we say no to these vaccinations, we lose all our privileges in society. Do you think it could get this bad?
I've already seen people in the UK who've gone against the narrative have threats of having their children taken into care. I mean, that's been used in the UK for a very long time as intimidation to parents to get them to get into line. And that's without the sledgehammer of a digital ID linked to a social credit scoring system and central bank currency or tokens, which can be turned off at will. And also, I mean, if this comes in, they don't need to build the walls, as Catherine rightly pointed out. They don't need to build the walls around our 15-minute communities. They just program your bank card so your card doesn't work more than 15 minutes away from your home, and that'll decide which shop you go to, which facilities you can use, and that's people just are sleepwalking into this. And it sounds almost unreal. They cannot believe that a government would inflict this upon them. But that's why they're not talking about it. That's why they're bringing it in quietly. It's always for your convenience and for your safety. Well, I think it was one of the early American revolutionaries that said that you're always being asked to give up your freedom for safety and convenience. Well, if you do that, you'll end up with neither freedom nor safety, and the only convenience will be that the government will be able to manage every aspect of your life very easily.
Catherine, let's really unpack it now then. If we have a look at this video, it shows, we'll just put this over while we keep talking. This shows a young Chinese woman who's just been arbitrarily locked out. She can't leave her smart city. She doesn't know why. There's nobody there to tell her, but her card pass won't work. And you can see she's trying every single exit from this city. You really realize when you watch this little video, this little snippet, it's open air prisons that they have planned for it, is it not, Catherine?
It's open air prisons, but it's the kind of open air prisons you would use for livestock. So we know that the World Economic Forum has said it's 2030 and you have no assets. They're very serious about this. It's by controlling financial transactions that you can siphon off and take those assets in hundreds of different ways. And I have many people say to me, I don't care. I don't have a lot of assets. I said, you have your children. What you're doing, if you look at every pedophile scandal we've dealt with for decades now, including, of course, in the U.S., we're having a big brouhaha about the refusal to release the Epstein files. You're basically saying, okay, the people who ran the Epstein network, who participated in the Epstein network, now have the power to literally force you to turn your kids over to them. Is that really what you want? And you're giving them literally that power. They won't need Epstein anymore to recruit your children. They'll just take them. So this is, I don't think people understand how dire ultimately, and the trick has been to build the corrals around us. So we've built 3 walls of the corral, and digital ID and programmable money in combination put up that 4th fence. And then we're in an entirely new world that most people can't fathom because we've enjoyed liberty, we've enjoyed financial transaction freedom. We can't fathom what this world is like, nor can we fathom the fact that we're looking at a leadership that has absolutely no empathy towards us and feels towards us the way a rancher might feel about livestock he's ready to auction off.
That is horrendous, Alex. That's horrendous, that we are absolutely nothing to our leaders who are meant to be our servants, who are meant to be representing us. They loathe us, don't they? This crop of
they
leaders.
Absolutely do. Yeah, I would argue that it's even worse than livestock. I've got livestock, and I like my livestock. The Bible says the righteous man takes good care of his beast. And in any case, it's an asset to me, right? Even if I didn't like my livestock, even if I thought you're a smelly cow, I don't like you, at least it has value for me. I have a vested interest in taking good care of it so that I can sell it at some point and make some money. These people actually hate us. And if you listen to them closely, it's actually very, very clear. I'll give you an example. I go to these UN climate summits every year. I'll be going to one in just a couple weeks in Brazil. And I've got the video of these people. They talk about human beings like we are some sort of plague on this planet. I'll never forget, I was in Rio de Janeiro in 2012 at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. And they had all these posters around. It was a kind of an anthropomorphic Earth. It looked very sick. It had a thermometer sticking out of its mouth. And then you had the doctor diagnosing the problem. And the doctor says, I know your problem. You have humans. Humans are like a cancer on this planet. It's the same general philosophy that we saw in the Club of Rome report in 1991, the first global revolution. As the Cold War was coming to an end, they needed kind of a new pretext to have this huge government, these massive taxes, this micromanagement of our lives. And they came up with the idea, and people can read this report themselves, you can order it on Amazon, that we needed a new enemy. And so we came up with the idea of the environment being threatened, of global warming. And they said that way, the enemy is humanity itself. And so these people regard us with a hatred that I don't think a normal person can understand, because we're occupying land that they think they're entitled to. We're consuming resources that they think they're entitled to. And to take it one step further, to get into the spiritual dimension, human beings are made in the image of God, is what the Bible teaches. This is actually one of the foundational principles of Western civilization. Whether you believe that or not, people who hate God, by definition, would hate those who are made in the image of God. And so you wonder, how can people murder millions of people? We saw it in China. We saw it in the Soviet Union. We saw it in Nazi Germany. And a normal mind doesn't comprehend this, because a normal mind doesn't want to murder millions of people. Your neighbor doesn't understand that there's a significant segment of the population, I don't know what it is, 1%, 2%, 4%, that hates humanity and is willing to actually exterminate millions of men, women, and even children. And get joy out of that, feel that they've accomplished something positive by that. So I would argue that humanity is at a crisis point right now. And just like was discussed, this Real ID thing, this is going to be the last major battle. If we give up, they will be able to enforce compliance on every other issue every time, or they will completely destroy your life. So we have to treat this with the seriousness it deserves. And to your point, Liz, I would encourage everybody watching here, share this out, send it to your elected officials, send it to your family, send it to your pastor, send it to anybody in a position of influence. We've got to get the alarm sounded here.
Okay, let's move to that so that people don't despair too much at this stage in the discussion, Catherine. Tell us about Solari.com. What does the name stand for and what you are doing? Because you've just in October, I think the 21st, begun a 60-day challenge to help the people, of whom there are billions of us, against the few, maybe 13 families, that's all, to help us to push back. What is Solari doing? If you could tell us about that.
So the great cause for optimism is that many of the implementations to build the control grid are being supported and financed by us. So if you look, for example, at I'll use America. If you look at the average American, they are going to work in building the control grid. They are banking with the banks that are leading the control grid. If you look at their IRA or their brokerage account, they are financing, and they are very excited because they're making lots of money building the control grid. And you know, there's a multiple personality disorder in how the money works. Now, one of the things we know is the digital control grid depends on a 100% digital transaction system, and we have not gotten there yet. A great deal of effort has been made by both the banks and the central banks to get us to 100%, but we're not there. And we believe the way to stop this cold that everybody can do. So I agree with Alex that this is spiritual. Everybody can pray, but everybody can use cash and preserve the analog systems, whether it's checks, money orders. There's a dedicated population in the United States using analog transaction systems and refusing to go all digital. If everybody threw their smartphone in the river or the lake tomorrow or the ocean tomorrow, this could never happen. So the first thing we can do is we can all use cash and refuse to go 100% digital. And one of the beauties of cash is if you look at the mechanisms we use to transact with cash, many of those come with surveillance and entrainment and subliminal programming and mind control. So what you'll find is you'll be much smarter about your money if the people you're transacting with or the mechanisms that you're transacting with aren't also mind controlling you. And cash does not come with entrainment or subliminal programming, at least that I know of. Though,
Give an example of that, Catherine, of subliminal mind control that comes with it. Tell people how they may be being manipulated, coerced.
Right. So digital electronic systems, whether on your TV or your smartphone or your laptop, can integrate basically mind control technology. So I first found out about this in the 80s. I overheard a conversation by two billionaire types I wasn't supposed to hear. And they were talking about entrainment, subliminal programming, and grossly oversimplified. Entrainment makes you resonate with something you normally wouldn't resonate. And then subliminal programming comes in through the resonation suggesting. And, and I first started to write about this at Solari because as an investment advisor, it was being used to market financial fraud. So a lot of times you see people who've lost money on healthcare fraud or financial fraud. Often those are marketed using entrainment technology. Also, people buying things they can't afford, those are marketed with entrainment technology. If you come to Solari, we have put in the words mind control in the search box. You'll pick up our collection, and we have a wealth of information. We just did a great interview called Cognitive Liberty with Josh Steinman on all the different things from mind control to propaganda that are done to basically make people persuadable. Of course, we know the big one being the pandemic, that the shots did a variety of things to people that really hurt cognition and their ability to protect themselves. We are also being poisoned, and that makes it harder to protect ourselves against these things. So to us, a major issue is cognitive liberty. But we know that a lot of the controls come with the digital technology that would also then be used to get 100%. So we're a big believer in cash and in preserving the analog systems. But the other thing is, if you go down your income statement and balance sheet, what you will find if you really dig in is they are few, we are many. We are building and financing and supporting this building of the control grid, and we have the power to stop. I dare say if everybody in the UK tomorrow said, I'm going to do everything I can to leave the banks who are supporting this. I'm going to do everything I can to stop investing in the companies that are doing this. I'm going to quit working for a company that's building a control grid and, go do something productive with my life. You would have, just as they're engineering a financial coup and a digital coup, you would have a financial rebellion. So part of this is connecting the dots between where our time and money is going and what we're supporting, and saying, no, I don't want to support something that's going to basically make me a slave.
Catherine, we'll put the Tucker Carlson interview you did underneath this. It's very, very good. And there's a large part where you discuss the basement dwellers, I'm going to call them. But people, even here in New Zealand, we've had so many of your American billionaires come here, including Peter Thiel. They're all around the South Island, Queenstown area, this little jewel of the Pacific. They've all built bunkers as if they're preparing for the end of time.
They're scared. They're scared.
Yeah.
If you were doing this to people, wouldn't you be scared?
I would. Right. I would. And it wouldn't just be of worldly things. It would be of certainly the divine. But
can I mention one other thing we can do?
Yes.
So a lot of this depends on significantly lowering our empathy towards other people. And a great deal is done with divide and conquer to turn us against each other. Yes. And this really is the mega rich versus everyone. And so it's very important not to let your empathy and your concern for other people be turned off, but instead to engage, because many of these solutions come down to, can I build local food systems that are healthy for me? Can I build local health systems that are healthy for me and that I can trust? I'm always telling people the currency of the future is relationships of trust. So get back into building those human networks, particularly around you and locally, that will allow you to pull out of a system which is really poisoning you.
But can we go back to what you said to Tucker about the time that you were offered a place in that elite, if you like it, I call them the parasite class, the parasite basement dwelling areas. And you talked about, you felt as if there was a locker down there with your name on it. But that was something made you decline. Something made you decline entry to this very exclusive club. What was that, Catherine? Because that applies to all of those who are helping build this prison.
So if you read my online book, what I knew coming out of the Bush administration is we had two choices. We could decentralize economic, political, and power in a way that built new and explosive wealth by using this technology to do that, or we could apply the technology for complete control. And it was clear to me that they kept choosing complete control, and I was convinced it would fail. And so I said, I'm just going to work on the alternative and building something, because when this fails, we need an alternative. We need we need a model based on human liberty and freedom that is also wealth building. And so that's what I want to work on, because I'm convinced that this will fail. My problem with what they're doing, even though eventually it will fail, I don't underestimate their ability to kill and destroy, so much of what we've built in the Western world. They're really out to destroy Western civilization.
Why are you convinced it will fail? And then I want to go to you, Andrew. Why are you convinced of that, Catherine?
If you study science or spirit or scripture, what you understand is the universe is alive. The universe is intelligent. We share intelligence with the trees, with the animals, with the, and all of creation is basically bursting with divine intelligence. And you can't digitize it. They have plans to digitize the Amazon and plans to digitize the rivers and the space fence to digitize the atmosphere. And it's like you're trying to replace God with something, a control network. And when you look at what the plans are, what you realize is you can't digitize God and you can't replace God. All you can do is make a mess. And if you look at how environmentally damaging and how wealth destroying it is, one of the great moments of optimism for me was when I simulated digital technology what we could do to optimize the investment of federal credit and appropriations by place in America. And what I realized is our economy is so suppressed because of the price of tyranny, just from the tyranny that Alex is describing in education or Andrew's been describing in politics. Tyranny is very, very wasteful and expensive. And I've been able to prove that mathematically by simulating sort of local economies and what is possible. And once you know what's possible, you realize, this model is going to fail.
It's heartening. Andrew, do you feel the same? And if so, why? Why do you feel it will fail?
Well, 14 years in Parliament and observing what was going on, I don't think we've ever had free market capitalism. I think we've had crony capitalism, and that isn't driving up. That's why we have tremendously low growth rates in the so-called developed world, because it's not real free markets, and the best companies with the best products aren't the ones that are thriving, because it's a club, and if you're not in that club, you've got a big problem. And if you're in the club, you don't have to make the best products most efficiently to control the markets, and that's where it's all gone terribly wrong. I agree with many of the points that have been made, especially about our ability to influence. Although the ruling elites and the big corporations, they are still sensitive to influence by the public. I mean, we've had the introduction of Bovir into dairy products to limit the methane emissions of cattle, of dairy cattle. Ludicrous, untested. The public have very little confidence in that, in their food supply, especially following the pandemic and the vaccine rollout. And a major company over here has had to announce that they're pulling out of it, because obviously they didn't say why they were pulling out of it, but the reason they're pulling out of it is no one's buying their products anymore. And that is the power of the consumer, the public, to influence policy. And they can have promised everybody they're going to keep, pumping Bovir into our food supply, but ultimately they're going to have to stop doing it because people just don't want to buy those products. I think there's two existential threats to us at the moment. Obviously, clearly, digital ID, which we've already touched on about how it's fundamental for the plans of the World Economic Forum, etc., to implement Agenda 2030. But I think the other thing is we've just got to keep ourselves out of a major conflict, which is the other angle or arrow to their bow. Obviously, if they can get us into a big war with Russia or China or both of them, then they can basically inflict martial law on us. And then they've got another excuse to say we've got to have ID cards or digital ID, because we always have ID cards during times of major conflict. And if we can do those two things, keep us out of digital ID and a major war, the truth's going to come out. The problem is that the other side know that as well, and that's why they're pushing so hard on both of those issues to actually get back control. I think they need the digital ID because so many people around the world have been slapped wide awake by the overreach of our governments during the COVID so-called pandemic, and they just need to reassert control. They can't sell it to the people. No one's going to vote for this. Very few people are going to vote for it. So they're bringing it in through the back door. And if we raise enough awareness, I think people are going to. But 66% of Brits now don't want digital ID.
Alex, are you with the other two? Do you agree that it will fall over? But what's your time frame, and what do you think are the obstacles?
Yeah, right now, I can't say with confidence where I think we'll be in the next few years. Over the long term, I have 100% confidence. There's not a shred of doubt in my mind that this whole wicked system is going to come down. The people will be exposed, and there will be justice. 100% guaranteed. Not one doubt in my mind. I've read the end of the book. I know where this goes. But in the meantime, I think we're probably in for a very wild ride here in the short term. When the World Economic Forum started using the term polycrisis a few years ago, that was what I had been warning about already for years. And Catherine mentioned Patrick Wood. He had been making similar warnings as well. they're going to be throwing at us, I think, crisis after crisis after crisis that will probably make COVID, in the words of Klaus Schwab, look like a small disturbance compared to the cyber pandemic and the food crisis and the wars and all the rest of it that they're planning on unleashing against us. I do believe they want to bring about a civil war, not just in this country, but probably throughout the Western world. I'm seeing some very troubling things happening in Ireland right now, I think being engineered with tensions being inflamed on both sides. So in the near term, I'm very concerned that we're headed for some very significant turbulence, if we want to put it mildly. But we did see during COVID, I think, some really, really encouraging signs. Yes, it was demoralizing. You know, if you had asked me in 2019, would 65, 70% of Americans go along with this if they said there was some kind of invisible enemy and we all had to give up all of our freedom? I'd say, that's ridiculous. We're America like that. That's not going to happen here. I was very disappointed to see so many of my fellow Americans fall for this because they were in terror from watching too much TV. But a lot of people learned a lot from that. And as we got into, 2.5 years of this foolishness, more and more people started saying, wait a minute here. I don't believe they would have ever eased up if we had not pushed back to the point where they had to. So, I think there's a good reason why these evildoers are building themselves underground bunkers. All these tech billionaires. I mean, there's a lot of these people. You talk to the people who build these bunkers, they'll tell you there's a lot of this going on right now, and they know that people aren't going to accept this passively. So they're going to try to divide us. As Catherine pointed out, they're going to try to get us to turn on each other, right? Your enemy is your neighbor who watches CNN. Your enemy is your neighbor who watches Fox News. Your enemy is your neighbor who voted for Trump. Your enemy is your neighbor who voted for Joe Biden, rather than uniting against them. But I think people are wising up. And if you notice, nobody is going back to sleep and going over to the side of the evildoers. All of the movement is from their side over to our side. So I'm encouraged by a lot of what we're seeing, but I don't want to give anybody just this rosy Pollyanna view. Oh, everything's going to be fine. We just have to say no to digital ID and we're all going to... No, I think we're going to be in for some very tough years ahead.
So Solari is advocating 60 days where you use only cash, which I think is wonderful. We recommend everybody goes to the Solari site, Catherine. But let's get into the minutiae of digital ID. One of the things people say to me often is, yes, but we already have digital ID. It's okay. It's not too bad. Why is the actual government-enforced digital ID so markedly different, and what will it lead to? And I want to just put in here, New Zealand is covertly, very quietly introducing it. You have to really hunt it down, and in it they say, oh, it'll all be fine, and it's for your convenience, for your safety. That sounds very familiar from the pandemic. So, but they're not discussing it anywhere publicly because they want to, I think you put it on Tucker, Catherine, beautifully. You said it's like they're corralling the people of the world and they're putting them into these narrow straits, and then they'll throw the net when they feel they've got us all there. So what is it that people really need to understand about the effect of this? Why is it so different from what we have now?
So we've all been watching the data centers be built, and a lot of enthusiasm about AI. One thing to understand about AI is where AI is very effective is at monitoring and implementing any system which can be mathematically based or expressed or simulated with math. Okay, and so what that means is spatial movements or financial transactions, it can handle mammoth amounts of data. So financial transaction control and a digital ID depend on exceptionally high precision of identifying that Liz is Liz and Andrew is Andrew and Alex is Alex. You need extraordinarily high precision, but you also need extraordinarily high precision where it can be interoperable with similar systems all around the world, so that it's essentially one giant interoperable high precision database. But then you want to set it up so that it literally has a corporate contractor backdoor. So the governments will basically require the system, but if you look at who has backdoor, from the intelligence agencies, the military, the corporate contractors, you're talking about a very different group of people who really ultimately control it. So the digital ID gives you the very high precision identification that you need to then move to the financial transactions and handle this enormous load of data and do it in a way that doesn't require enormous amounts of customer service and tech support because it's way too big and too high moving, so that the precision and quality of the digital ID and its interoperability and then access behind the scenes to the real players pulling the strings is it's a combination that is necessary if you're going to put this in place.
So never underestimate. It's vastly different from what we have now. It can really dig down into every single detail of our lives. Every single detail?
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Well, you're talking, again, back to programmable money. You're talking about creating both with stable coins now, in some places central bank digital currency, in some places stable coins, and then asset tokens, affecting them, basically integrating them as programmable, call it the social credit system, and that is you're basically talking about all the transactions on the planet, but building it on a distributed blockchain. And you don't want to start pouring data into a distributed blockchain ledger unless you've got very high precision data.
So what does it mean for me as a mum or a grandmother? Does it mean that if I own a house, for example, let's get down to people's lives, Catherine. If I own a house, and I have a mortgage, would my details with the bank and the mortgage be all online then, because it's part of my digital ID profile, right?
In theory, where they're going is that we'll all be online and available in the distributed ledger. So in essence, in one sense, you have no privacy, although I would argue the people who can always access and use that data require a certain amount of capital to do the data analytics. But you're going to have a lot less privacy than you have now. But the other thing is the ability to use that data to extract value from you is extraordinary. So let me give you an example. We create an asset token on your house. I heard one software developer saying, the great thing about tokenizing your real estate is then when you check out at the grocery store, you can pay for your groceries with 0.01% of 1% of your house equity. Well, you can imagine if I can start to extract your equity in those variety of ways, how quickly it will be to be able to siphon off ownership and control of your assets. So, with programmable money, basically the opportunities to take the one I use the most, because people say, again, I have no assets, so I don't care. Imagine getting a call in 2030 that says, you have 3 kids. If you don't transgender them, we're going to turn off your money.
And 6-7 years ago, I would have said, oh, that's nonsense, just like Alex said earlier. Now, after the pandemic, I absolutely can see that as a possibility. Catherine, I brought up the house because somebody said to me, if, for example, a hacker got in, and let's face it, with AI, with robots, hacking is going to be so easy, which is why I think Bitcoin is not even safe now, because they're going to be able to hack so effectively. But say somebody got in and was able to hack my house ownership and take over the title. To whom do I have redress? And this person said to me, there is no one, Liz. The government won't.
There's no one.
The government
There's
won't
no
cover
one.
that.
There's literally no equivalent of customer service, tech support, or, in theory, someone could say the courts might be a place to go, but I think trying to get any fixes is going to be extremely difficult.
And I see Andrew smiling, as I have. He's been through horrific lawfare, and it costs a huge amount, and there are very questionable judges. So I want from Andrew and Alex your questions, your reservations about digital ID to Catherine. What are yours, Andrew?
Well, I gave a speech on Saturday at a rally in Cardiff, the capital of Wales. And that's apparently the city that had the first facial recognition cameras installed, and there were 4 of them just across from where I was speaking. I'm aware that a company called Fujitsu are involved in the UK in the development of the software for facial recognition cameras. And for those who aren't worried about the freedoms as they should be, the efficacy of the technology. Fujitsu were the company that brought in the Horizon software for the post office, which was covered up for 20 years, that put thousands of people, criminalised them wrongly for a dodgy computer system. And what the shocking thing is that despite the Fujitsu Horizon post office scandal, that company's been given 150 contracts with the UK government since, and is intrinsic in the facial recognition software. So there will be mistakes will be made, and we're going to get to a system where computer says no. And there's nothing we can do about it. And I really don't trust the big tech companies. They've covered up too many mistakes in the past. And as to the integrity of the data and hacking, yes, of course, it's going to be a target for hackers. And the government's have got a lamentable record of allowing data breaches. But I mean, I think the government's going to sell our data to whoever's got the money to buy it. And if anybody thinks that's going to be irresistible to the, I'm afraid, corrupt politicians that we have in office around the world, of course they're going to sell our data.
Catherine, your reply to that, I see you nodding.
So I was a government regulator and dealt with what we would call leakage. So I know a lot about politicians selling data, but I think it's worse than just selling it, because they're going to set up arrangements for corporate contractors and cloud services where, the system is designed upfront to share, in a very large and systemic and permanent way. So it's going to be much worse than just collecting and selling. It's going to be, it's not, the government will not be in control on day one.
Alex, it's horrifying. I mean, it's horrifying to think if I was a very expert hacker and you had a lot of money in your account, I could go in there, take it. You have no one to whom you can turn. You have no redress for that. That's the vulnerability we're talking about for every human if digital ID is brought in, is it not?
There's no question about it. In fact, exactly 1 week ago today, my Facebook was hacked, and I've been trying for a week now to get in touch with somebody there. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, hacking, I think, is a major concern. And in fact, I think it'll be used as a pretext to move us one step further down this road to digital tyranny. But I think what people need to understand really at the end of the day about a digital ID is the digital ID itself is not the problem. It is the vehicle that will make all of the other stuff not just possible, but almost inevitable. Think of it like an on-ramp to a superhighway that has no exits. Once you get on that on-ramp, you can't turn around. There's nowhere to get off. And you don't have to speculate about what they want to do because they've already told you. Just listen to some of the sessions as a World Economic Forum. Listen to Yuval Noah Harari with his nonsense about Homo Deus and surveillance under the skin. Pick up a copy of Klaus Schwab's book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He summarizes this in one sentence. He says it's a fusion of all digital, physical, biological identities. And then he breaks that down in the book. He talks about mandatory government brain scans to determine whether you're thinking thoughts that might represent a security risk. I mean, that's the kind of nightmarish future that these megalomaniacs and totalitarians have planned for us. And the digital ID is the critical piece of the puzzle that's going to make it not just all possible, but inevitable. Once they have you in that, they can give you as many boosters as they want to give you. They can, we've heard all of them talk about it. They're literally marketing this to Americans now on NBC fake news. You're going to have your chip under your skin, and it's going to be your digital ID and your digital wallet. I mean, the EU is rolling out right now your digital wallet with your digital ID, your digital currency. It's happening as we speak. It's not a hypothetical future threat. There are thousands of lemmings in human bodies walking around Sweden right now who have their microchip with their COVID vaccine passports. Once they take that last critical step, which is the digital ID, that'll be your access for being able to work, being able to access healthcare, being able to go shopping, being able to get your children enrolled in any kind of school or program, there will be no turning back. If you say no to any of the future things, you'll just be locked out of everything. So that, I think, is the real threat that people need to understand. It's not like the digital ID itself is going to be the end of the world. It's that the digital ID makes all of these other evil things practically impossible to resist. And so here is where we have to make our stand. I've been warning about this for at least 15 years. I mean, when they came out with ID 2020, this was, I think 15 years ago, I did an article about this in the New American. It was already obvious to me then. People can go back and read that article. It was Bill Gates, it was Microsoft and Gavi, it was the Rockefeller Foundation. Like, I mean, why were Bill Gates and the Rockefellers plotting to give us digital IDs at the international level 15 years ago? Was it because of COVID? No, it's because they understood it. And at the same time, by the way, they launched the Better Than Cash Alliance. This was 2012. Again, I covered this in TNA. Ford Foundation, United Nations, Bill Gates. I mean, all the same suspects. Visa, MasterCard. They've been planning this for so many years. So we don't have to speculate. We know exactly what they want to do with this. And the hacking, the cybercrime, all of that will be a great excuse to move us more in that direction. And it's being implemented, unfortunately, piece by piece by well-meaning people. Texas is having this debate right now. They want to make you have to give your ID to all these big companies to be able to access pornography. Now, I don't think people ought to be accessing pornography. That's my opinion. But the idea that the legislators are being told is, well, this is how we're going to protect children from pornography. So each little piece of the infrastructure is being built with seemingly good motivations. The digital ID is the big prize, after which there will be no exit. There will be no U-turn. So folks, pay attention here.
Catherine, the UN, what's the role of the UN in all of this? And I think we do need to move to Agenda 2030. And my question, when is Bill Gates going to be locked up? He is just so evil. But the UN's role in this, Catherine?
So the UN is a collaborating, coordinating body. And to me, the real power, of course, is where the money is with you have the World Bank, the IMF, and the BIS, and these other organizations that have sovereign immunity. And so we've created an international construct of organizations that have sovereign immunity and extraordinary resources to provide a forum to not only collaborate about these things, but incentivize everyone to help. In America, the UN has less of an impact than I feel it does when I'm in Europe. I will say this, and I wanted to respond to what Alex was saying. We have seen remarkable moments of good news in the last year. So after the floods in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, the central banks in Scandinavia, who've been in the lead of getting rid of cash, came out and said, you can't depend on the electrical systems. And we really do need cash, and we're not going to be resilient. And so we've seen all sorts of disasters around the world and people saying, wait a minute. It happened in New Zealand, Liz. I don't know whether you saw it. The governor of the Central Bank of New Zealand, after the cyclones came out and said, thank heavens we had cash, we would have been toast because you can't depend on the electricity. So there are bright spots here, but I have to tell you, it's what Andrew described. If everybody woke up tomorrow and tried to use cash as much as they could, whenever they could, and started rejecting these systems, it could absolutely get walked back. And so the state of play here is, will enough people in the UK and Europe and the United States take responsibility to say, no, I'm not going to comply? That's the question. Will they do that? And I continue to see too many people saying, as long as I can make a lot of money, I can protect myself. That used to work. When I was on Wall Street, that system worked. Now it doesn't. So when Andrew was offered the chance to get whatever he wanted, whatever he had asked for, when they rolled this out, it could have gotten walked back or taken. That's what you have to understand. The system of, there's a workaround for me and I can make enough money and go to my bunker in New Zealand. It's not going to work this time. So there's no out from this unless we do it together.
That's profound. Before we came to air, Andrew, we were talking as Catherine came on the call about the time in your office in Westminster. You were offered whatever you want, Andrew. And your reply was, just very briefly, for people who haven't heard that story, your reply at the time?
Well, I was shocked. And I said, what do you mean I can have whatever I want? They said, well, just tell us what you want and we'll get it for you.
And in return, they wanted your silence.
Well, they wanted silence and compliance with the narrative. And I said, is that the game we're playing? And they said, that's the game we always play. I said, anything I want? They said, well, pretty much. I said, in that case, then if that's the game we're playing, I want the Prime Minister's resignation letter. Can I have that? They told me I couldn't have that. And I said, well, that's a shame because I don't want anything else, do I, if that's the game we're playing? If we go into digital ID, Alex is absolutely right. That opens Pandora's box to everything else that will be inflicted upon us. We can't. We are currently in a sort of global tyranny And it's quite dark, and it's going to get worse. It's going to have to get worse before it gets better. But the darker it gets, the nearer we are to the end. Is the comfort I take. And ultimately, we're never going to comply our way out of tyranny. I think RFK Jr. said that a few weeks ago, and he's absolutely right. The people who are pushing digital ID on us, they're the same characters who told us that the vaccines were safe and effective during COVID. These are self-confessed Malthusian eugenicists. They haven't got the best intent for humanity, and we're going to have to take a little bit of discomfort. But a bit of discomfort now is going to be better than the future we'll assign to ourselves and our children if we accept the tyranny of digital ID for an easy life. It won't be an easy life. It will be a life that will be barely worth living if we accept this. And I come back to what I said at the beginning, that if we say yes to digital ID, we'll be in a situation where we'll never be able to say no to our governments ever again. And we're heading very fast to the Chinese social credit scoring system, which will be inflicted upon us with all the control mechanisms that comes with it.
I want to put in here a clip from Vandana Shiva, who talks about what happened with India when they brought in digital ID and this centralized monetary system. And Catherine, perhaps you can talk about this after we have a look.
My country was the first where they made cash illegal. 2016, digitalization was forced in the country. 8 o'clock in the evening announced midnight, cash was illegal, the big notes. And 70% of the economy crashed. This digitalization is now going all over the world, and there's a war on cash. They call it war on cash because cash is merely a medium of exchange. It has no value in itself. It's just a promise. You read the dollar note, it says, I promise to pay the bearer. When it's digital, even a credit card, you're giving rents to the global financial system. But when it's cryptocurrency in the hands of algorithms, in the hands of big tech, they will do what is happening in China. Create social credit system to decide a new caste system. And you might have also followed that while all this has been happening, the founder of the World Economic Forum did a book called The Great Reset on how to deal with the COVID crisis. And everything we're seeing unfold is part of that Great Reset. But an element of that Great Reset is you will own nothing. If ever there was a time for humanity to wake up, now is the time.
So, Catherine, that was 2016. And just tell people what did happen in India in a little more detail. It was an horrific experiment, but nonetheless, the experiment for what they want to roll out, was it not?
Yes, so they implemented a digital ID. My understanding is also with biometrics, but they pulled in a lot of the large cash bills and forced conversion. And what you see is, again, this dynamic of centralizing control of the economy creates a lot of billionaires, but it shrinks the pie. And if you look at the devastation in terms of shrinking the pie in India, it was quite horrible and extraordinary. And that's what I said. The good news here is our pie is so shrunken that we can't imagine the wealth production that could occur if human liberty was allowed to basically, if we went back to if in a world where liberty and entrepreneurs can flourish, the wealth creation is so beautiful, so amazing, is so exciting. Imagine a world where everybody was eating healthy food and had plenty of energy. I mean, it's just, I know what can be, and I know the extraordinary harm done to people in the economy from this tyranny. And I think if I have to say anything, the history of freedom is it always looks dire and hopeless, and then, magically at the last minute, freedom sort of takes over and wins. And we've seen that many times, both in Europe and the United States. And I'd love to share some stories someday if we have time. But, we have to get there, and we have to believe it's possible. And for me, I've spent a lot of time in my life with the central bankers and the people doing this, and I have to tell you, I would rather, I'm like RFK, I would rather die in the barricades than go into the system. I will not live in the system they're planning for us. It's not worth living. And so you have nothing to lose by using cash and doing everything you can to refuse to comply now, because, you know, whatever the inconvenience, it's far better than what they're proposing. It's not a world you want to live in.
I want to come back to you after we just farewell Alex, who I know has to go now. Alex, your final words on the discussion so far. But had people said no in the pandemic to the forced jabs? So many I've interviewed have said I was crying as they jabbed me. I didn't want it. I always wanted to say in the interview, if you'd only said no and sacrificed, we wouldn't be where we are now. So the point of that story is if people say no now, we won't be getting on that highway, that ghastly highway to hell that you described, to quote AC/DC. Alex, your final words, just your final words for today, and we'll talk to you again very soon, I hope.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And, you know, I'm here in Florida. We really, not only did we say no, we encouraged our elected officials to say no. So, for example, on the vaccine mandate that came from Joe Biden through OSHA, our governor called a special session of the legislature. We passed a law saying that anybody who fired anybody for not taking the shot was going to pay a fine that was 10 times larger than whatever the feds were going to fine you. So I would encourage people, work with your local, with your state elected officials, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, to try to push back on this. I was just in India a few months ago, and the system is already out of control. They wouldn't even let me buy a few things for my wife at the mall without a smartphone. And I don't carry a smartphone. I don't have one. I use a flip phone. So I had to actually ask my friend, like, hey, can I borrow your smartphone so I could buy this dress for my wife? It was absolutely ridiculous. But that's just the beginning of what they're planning. And, you know, India has been praised by Bill Gates for being a pioneer on this digital public infrastructure. I think they've had a little bit of an easier time implementing it in India than they might in the Western world, because we do have these traditions of liberty and organized resistance to tyranny. But it is essential that we resist. And I'll just leave folks with this. Over the long term, I think the critical place where this battle is happening is actually in the hearts and minds of children. And so I always sound like a broken record because I'm always talking about education. Folks, we can fight digital ID and central bank digital currencies and all the rest of it until the cows come home, until we're blue in the face. It's not going to make one bit of difference over the long term if these evildoers indoctrinate and brainwash 85-90% of our children. They will win. The totalitarians will win over the long term. Every time it's just a waiting game for them. So I would encourage people, take immediate steps. You don't need to wait for a law to pass or an election or anything like that. You don't need permission. Take immediate steps to protect your children from this brainwashing so that they don't end up not just submitting to this evil 5, 10, 20 years down the road, but even begging for it. You asked about the UN. The UN is, I believe, a critical mechanism for this. They use the three-legged stool approach, where one leg is governments. That's where the UN comes in, all the national governments of the world. The other two legs, business, private sector, that's the World Economic Forum, and then religion, which we'll save for another day. But they're working to bring all the churches, imams, rabbis, everybody together on this. So, folks, it's a multi-pronged assault. Your children are going to be critical to this battle, and it's been a great honor to be here with you guys. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share on these things, and I hope we'll all talk again very soon.
It's lovely to talk to you, Alex. I know you do have to go. There was one metaphor you gave in another interview. I want you to repeat it here. You said if a building was burning in your children's school, you wouldn't go to the school board and ask them to change the policy on burning buildings. You would race into that school, grab your children, and take them home safely. That's the equivalence, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's even more urgent than that, because a burning building will hurt your children physically, which is bad. None of us want our children hurt physically. I've got 6 so far, praise the Lord. But it's even worse than this, because they're being destroyed physically, morally, mentally, academically, spiritually, emotionally, in every possible way. They're being destroyed. They're being conditioned to love slavery, and that is simply unacceptable. So, folks, run into that burning building, grab your children. I would encourage people, make sure you're finding good information. The censorship's going to increase, so sign up for the Solari report. Keep following Liz and all the different platforms. You can get our newsletter at libertysentinel.org. You can get our free daily headlines at thenewamerican.com. Lots of resources there, folks. There's no excuse to not be active in this battle. And thanks again, Liz and Andrew and Catherine. God bless you guys all.
Bless you too, Alex. Thank you. Just back to the UN, Catherine, while Alex leaves our discussion. The UN, we hear now, is potentially going to be headed by Jacinda Ardern if the awful Helen Clark, who also wanted to head up the UN from New Zealand, has her way. Helen Clark, a rampant communist, and Ardern the same. These people are... I mean, this woman sells herself through movies and a book deal and all sorts of things as this compassionate woman. She is widely loathed in New Zealand. She was the cruelest prime minister we ever had. But they don't stop. The Bill Gates, all of them, they keep coming at us. Should Gates be behind bars, in your opinion? Should Ardern?
So, I would say we have a tradition in the United States of a death penalty, and treason requires, calls for death penalty. So I wouldn't necessarily put him behind bars. But, we're talking about people who are engaging in planning and implementing depopulation.
Yes.
So, and that, and we continue to see leaders who are very effective at implementing depopulation promoted and supported and encouraged. And I think, it's pretty simple. I never worry about sort of those guys rising in the system. We have to let go of all of that. There's a system, its goal is depopulation. Its goal is to serve the mega rich, and we just have to stop supporting it. And what I see are millions of people every day supporting and believing it and paying attention to it and listening to it. And we just need to understand, they are our enemies. We need to let go and stop giving them energy and stop supporting them.
Andrew, your reaction to that?
Yes, our systems of governance around the world have got us into this mess. Yes. And having been on the inside for nearly a decade and a half, what disappoints me currently, we don't have any political figures who are talking about, radical reform of our system of governments, because I honestly don't think that the system that's got us into this mess and is keeping us in this mess, exacerbating this mess, is the system that's going to get us out of this mess. I agree with Catherine about the ultimate sanction for those who've committed crimes against humanity, and that's what I think's being committed and has been committed by those in positions of power and responsibility around the world. I did raise this in the House of Commons a couple of years ago, much to the consternation of the members who were present, when I said that historically I'd always been against the death penalty, on the basis that if it's morally wrong to take a life, it's wrong for the state to take a life in revenge. But I did say that the events since the pandemic have made me reconsider my position on this, and that for crimes against humanity, where the number and the harm inflicted is so huge, that there may have to be the ultimate sanction. Obviously, the Chamber, I never mentioned what it was all about, but the Chamber were fairly heckling me at that point. I think they knew what I was aiming at. And I would point out that when the globalist Tony Blair got into power with New Labour in 1997, the first thing that his government did, it was not in his manifesto, and it surprised everyone. And at the time I was baffled when I read about it. I'm not baffled now. The first piece of legislation that Tony Blair breathlessly rushed through with his new government was to take the death penalty out of the Treason Act in the UK.
Wow.
And I think Winston Peters, who's in our current government, I think he was responsible for doing that in New Zealand. And that's interesting because he's an enigma, a little bit like Trump, Catherine.
Well, what is treason? Treason is conspiring with forces against the people. And that's what's been conducted in all of our countries around the world. And that is, in fact, it's high treason because they're on the public payroll. So it is high treason.
Extraordinary. And Catherine, I was just trying to align Winston Peters here in New Zealand, who's an enigma. He seems to be our friend 1 minute on the freedom side. The next minute he's looking the other way while they pass these draconian measures. He does seem to have his parallel in Trump in America. He seems very enigmatic. Yes, he's done some good things. Yes, I can say he's better than Kamala Harris. but your article, which we will put up here, talking about where we're at, and you've been tracking really the laws that have been passed since April of 2025, is a crucial one for everybody to read, because in this article, you're really talking about the betrayals of Trump as well. Where are you standing on President Trump, Catherine?
So you have to remember, President Trump was the president who authorized Operation Warp Speed and funded $18 billion for the military to implement a mass atrocity. That was President Trump. So in about 6 weeks, it was early summer, I said on the Solari report, I believe that the bankers have chosen Trump because he's the man who can get conservatives to go along with the control grid. Using immigration election fraud, he will be able to sell the digital ID and the big tech solutions. And that's exactly what's happened. Although the reason we started to keep a collection at Solari, and everybody can read it by going to Solari and looking up just put control grid in the search box or go to latest and you'll find it because we update it every week. They move so quickly. Even I was surprised at how quickly they were moving to implement the different pieces of both programmable money and digital ID and other aspects of the system, including the data centers and the AI implementation. And at the speed at which they moved, starting literally the day after the inauguration with the $500 billion Stargate proposal for the data centers, and it was very quick. It was clear to me that someone had been working for a very long time on preparing everything and being ready to go. So now I can say this is Trump, but if you look at the US government, we have a annual expenditure of $6 trillion, $4 trillion comes in on taxes and other revenues, fees and tariffs, and then $2 trillion is borrowed. The United States government is in a debt trap. And so literally you have to do what the bankers tell you. And what we're watching is a Congress and a president who have been for many years, this is not just now, operating outside of the fundamental laws of the United States, particularly the financial management laws. You know, they are operating the government financially on a criminal basis. And I'm assuming it's because essentially that debt trap is being used to engineer control. And what you will find as a political matter is the problem that most politicians face in America. To give you an example, I was with a group of leaders in Idaho not that long ago, and one of them said, you know, every year we send $1 to Washington and then we get $1.19 back. And every time I try to enforce the Constitution, my constituents say I want the 19 cents. So there is an economic component to this control that's happening. And it's really put the central bankers in the catbird seat as they get all the governments in the world in a debt trap. When I had a wonderful colleague, Meryl Nass, who was working to get us out of the UN treaty, and she was talking with countries across Europe and in the United States. And the leadership basically said, we're in a debt trap. You know, we need to agree to this or else they'll cut off our credit. And so part of real solutions means we have to get deeply into the money. And the little secret that we've been talking about here, Liz, is if you give control back, you know, to a liberty-based entity or government or people, they don't need that 19 cents. If they have the flexibility to make that dollar work behind freedom, entrepreneurship, innovation, we don't need their 19 cents. We can make the economy work much better, you know, using fundamental principles of growth. We don't need their 19 cents. But right now, I think there are many politicians in that debt trap all around the world who think they need that 19 cents.
Not only do you have a prodigious intellect, but you've also worked at the upper levels of finance. Take those of us who really don't understand into that debt trap. Who is the money owed to? Where does it come from? And what would happen if a country defalcated? If they said, you know what? We're done. We're done with your loans. I mean, I know that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, people came to New Zealand in the early 60s to a prime minister called Keith Holyoake, opened up their bags and said, we've got all this money. And he took it. like a fool when we were a great little independent country. And from there on, it's been a sort of domino effect of control from overseas. But just what would happen if somebody said no? If Andrew got into as Prime Minister in the UK, which millions in the UK would love, and he said to all of them, no, we're not paying your exorbitant usury rates. No.
Okay, so part of the challenge is, so in America, we have a debt-based currency. And in fact, we don't need a debt-based currency. So the $38 trillion of debt we have was essentially created issuing that currency, and we could have done it without the debt. So to a certain extent, it's sort of a fundamental major fraud. But there's another part to this story, and this is the barrier we have to break through. And this is what Andrew would have to do when he becomes prime minister. So I'll use the U.S. story. I was giving a speech many years ago, and I've been asked to talk about how the money works on organized crime. And it was meant to be a very light, funny description of Wall Street and Washington's dependency on all sorts of money laundering, including narcotics trafficking, all the different ones. We had just had testimony in Congress in 1998 about the Dark Alliance allegations, where the U.S. military and intelligence was bringing narcotics into Mena, Arkansas, and it was around the crack cocaine explosion. Anyway, during that testimony, a reporter I was working with was told by the Department of Justice spokesperson that the U.S. economy is the global leader in money laundering and launders at that time $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money, which is now with financial fraud, it's a much bigger number now. But so I was talking to the audience and I said, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in money laundering? And we had a little conversation. The goal of the conference was to help our society evolve spiritually. So it was a very spiritually interested and aware, well-educated audience. And they said, well, if we stop being the global leader, that money would go to Hong Kong or Singapore, and we'd have trouble financing the government deficit. So our taxes might go up and our government checks might stop. And that money would go to Singapore or London Stock Exchange. And so our IRAs and 401ks would go down in value. And I said, okay, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your neighborhood, your town, your state tomorrow. Who here will push the button? Out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, only one would push the button. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our IRAs to go down in value. We don't want our taxes to go up, and we don't want our government checks to stop. So, which is to say, if you became the president tomorrow, your political guy would come in and say, the American people just spent billions of dollars to get you elected, and now they all want their government grant, or they want a contract, or they want their COLA. And you turn to your Secretary of Treasury and say, well, you got to be nice to the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of money laundering, the accumulated capital thereon. So you're a prisoner of the model. And why I keep going back to the wealth creation that is possible with freedom. The only way to get out of the model is to radically re-engineer in a way where we stop poisoning our people, we stop euthanizing, and we let them really rock and roll as entrepreneurs and grow businesses. What you're going to do what you're going to do in Wales is totally different than what you're going to do in Tulsa. It's totally different than what you're going to do in Brooklyn. It's totally different than what you're going to do in the area you were elected from, Andrew. I was hearing about his local economy
Northwest
when I last
Leicestershire.
saw him. Right, Northwest. And so you've got to decentralize. And of course, if you look at the people that we're watching, they use technology to centralize control. They don't want to decentralize. And so that's the tension here. And what Alex said about just going to the burning building and take your kids, we have to decentralize, but we have to do as much of it as possible by the just do it method, because the little secret sauce there is we can create wealth. They can centralize control in a way that shrinks wealth, but they can't create it. We can create it. And that's what we need to do.
That is beautiful, Andrew. We can decentralize by going to farmers markets and making connections with local farmers and buying directly and not going to the stores and not using the digitized money or any of the digital needs for control or facial recognition. We can just directly to our markets. We can grow our food. We can start to barter much more. Have these ideas been central to you, Andrew, when you've thought, how would I change England? How will I change England when I get back
Absolutely,
in?
but I mean, in my 14 and a bit years representing Northwest Leicestershire and taking control of the local council with my councillors in 3 years before that, in 2007, I mean, it's not an accident that with the right mindset, we took the poorest constituency in Leicestershire to the richest in 12 years. Delivered the highest economic growth out of 650 constituencies. Northwest Leicestershire consistently, once we got going, was delivering the highest economic growth in the country, and we built enough houses to keep the housing prices 30% below UK average, so above UK average household incomes, below UK average housing costs, equals happiness. It's not rocket science. I'm not surprised that the powers that be wanted to get me out of Parliament. The way that my constituency was thriving was embarrassing to them, and it wasn't even a full-time job. It was a part-time job. And it just showed the other MPs up.
And what were the elements of that, Andrew? What did you do? You
well, we've had a very repressive socialist local council and the planning department. I actually built made a £10 million investment in my constituency before I was elected. Built a factory, created 300 jobs on a 14-acre site on an industrial estate at Measham, and the planning department locally, they were so hostile. They'd have thought, sort of bringing in prosperity and investment and jobs, you'd have thought I was bringing in bubonic plague. I didn't forget that when we got into office. We just gutted the planning department and said, yes, we're going to have a whole new ethos where we treat the public as the customer, and we're going to be business friendly. And some of the councillors, some of the planning officers actually stood up, and we gave them all the presentations. And they said, why do we have to treat the public like customers? They can't go anywhere else. So they all just had to go. And the sad thing is that although they got kicked out of Northwest Leicestershire, they undoubtedly will still be in the planning system, working somewhere else and having an equally corrosive effect on the economy wherever they are. And we need a fundamental change to the civil service. I mean, that's an oxymoron now, the civil service, using that name. We need to get rid of the corruption. I mean, I think we've got the most corrupt country in the world in the UK. I think we are the head of the globalist snake. And I would actually disagree with Catherine on one issue. I think the City of London and our UK overseas territories and the banking system we've got, I think we could give America a damn good run for their money on being the centre of money laundering. And I think we do need a radical overhaul. I've been looking for some time now at a system where we could get rid of all the current taxes in the UK and bring more money in with a financial transaction tax of probably no more than 0.25% on payer and payee on every transaction transacted in the UK. It's a very broad-based tax, which is unavoidable. If you want to transact in the UK, we're going to take that small amount of money out of every financial transaction, and wealth and having money. And I've been very poor and very rich and very poor again. It doesn't buy you health, love, or happiness. It buys you choices. And my definition of true poverty is people who have no choices. And by completely taking away people's disposable income, that is a reduction of choice. It's a reduction of freedom. And that's what we're seeing with digital ID, the increased taxes, which are going to hit us again this autumn, despite the fact that we're at record levels of taxation. They will rise again. No one ever talks about creating efficiency in government anymore. That's very much out of fashion. And of course, the state gets larger. Those people are more likely to comply with the diktats of the government because they are reliant on the state. And the productive sector gets smaller and smaller and smaller and more squeezed by legislation, regulation, excessive taxation. We're into a doom loop, as Catherine said. I mean, if these people are destroying the Western society and our economies. And if it's not engineered, you couldn't do it any better than they're doing it. It's engineered.
Totally engineered. And I've talked to you briefly about that, Andrew, that I put up a party in the last election in New Zealand. I was absolutely left out of the mainstream media discussions because they didn't obviously want this to take hold. But we said 0% tax for NZ Loyal, and there was just a transaction tax. And if you look at the numbers, the people who do the most transactions, millions of transactions every day, are the banks. So the banks would actually be paying for a lot of the roading in the hospitals, because if it was a transaction tax, it enables people to choose whether they'll spend or not, Catherine, and that enables money in middle-class pockets again, and that enables middle-class businesses to flourish again, and that means they start employing people again, and so you have this
Also,
upward spiral.
you don't need very intelligent people working in accountancy firms to find ways of avoiding paying taxation because it can't be done. They can move into the productive economy, and you're leaving people with much more of their cash in their hand, and that is going to be freedom. That is the ultimate freedom. It's a very simple system. People wouldn't need a tax return, because that would be your bank statement, would be your tax return, where you paid all your taxes. It'd make the banks responsible for collecting that money. It'd be handed over at the end of the working day every day. The government would know exactly the health of the economy, because they'd have a report saying how much financial transactions have taken place. It would be a fantastic system, and the only tax inspectors we'd need would be people to keep an eye on the arch criminals, who are the banks, who would be collecting the money in for us.
That's exactly right. And actually, Catherine, it's based on the premise that taxation is the doorway to our slavery. There's a very strong argument that this whole CBDC and the digital ID and all of it is a form of slavery, enslaving us. But really, taxation is that doorway. Would you agree with that, Catherine? What's your view?
So CBDC, or programmable money with stablecoins and asset tokens, is a way of implementing taxation without representation. In fact, it's so bad. We had, the Federal Reserve System in the United States has 12 Fed banks, and one of the ones in Minneapolis, the president of the Minneapolis Fed in 2023 said we should never do this, because we're talking about taxation without representation. They'll be able to just take the money out of your account. Yes. Biden's nominee for controller of the currency, right before her confirmation hearings, and luckily she was not confirmed, published an article in the Vanderbilt Law Review saying the wonderful thing about CBDC, or programmable money, is if you're worried about inflation, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts. It was quite extraordinary.
Oh, it's quite tyrannical. And just explain that term, programmable money, for people who don't fully understand what that means, Catherine.
So programmable money is digital money, digital currency that can be connected to a social credit system, which determines the rules by which you can, carrots and sticks, be incentivized or penalized for how you're behaving. So it's part of a digital system, usually where you're under regular surveillance, and I can create a different set of rules for each individual. So, for example, let's say that I think Andrew ultimately can't serve the system well, so I can set him up to live a very lean life and hopefully be euthanized as soon as possible. Whereas if I think you can be very helpful, you're a talent, I want to run one of my companies, you're going to be allowed to have far more advantages. You'll be able to travel further. You'll be able to get a higher income. So you can set up very complex rule systems that carrots and sticks incentivize people and encourage them to behave in certain ways. And it's a way of hurting them and incentivizing them and controlling them. And it's quite, when you understand that each person can have a set of rule systems and be tracked. There's a wonderful movie called The Lives of Others about Stasi surveillance in East Germany before the wall came down. And you see what it's like to live in a system where it's a group of artists who are under 24/7 surveillance by human surveillance teams. What we don't understand now is with software, bots, and AI, we are all tracked 24/7 by surveillance teams that are trying to extract value for a company or a government or whatever. But the ultimate the ultimate sort of pinnacle of this system is with digital ID and programmable money, which has legal tender status from the government. Then you're talking about total control. And when I say total control, by setting rules for you, complex rules that can move and change in real time depending on your behavior, I can literally get rid of elected representatives and the executive branch because I can implement all of those fiscal policies, the rules and regulations through the money. And so the bankers can take this is a coup d'etat because now you're talking about the bankers not only running monetary policy, but all of fiscal policy, which is not to say they might not leave Parliament in place or they might not leave the Prime Minister in place. But at that point, they're theater, they're not real in terms of any power or authority.
Programmable money also allows the bankers to manipulate the economy. As Catherine said, they could have sections of the economy who inflation's too high, so you just can't spend any money until we release the controls. But also, if they wanted to stimulate the economy, they could set your money that they could say, well, if you haven't spent this money by tomorrow, it disappears. And they would keep changing the rules because it destabilizes people and confuses them. And that's exactly what happened about the constant changing of the rules and regulations regarding the restrictions during the pandemic. And that destabilized populations and created the compliance. So no one really knew what the rules were and created confusion. They'll have that over us 24/7 with the digital currency.
Could you see?
I would say that all this talk though and fighting back, I think one of the most popular, I'll predict one of the most popular Christmas presents that people will want this Christmas in the UK will be an analog Nokia phone. I don't think the government have passed any legislation that says that you have to carry a smartphone with you. And what we're seeing is record sales in the UK of analog phones.
And anything smart is S for surveillance, M for monitoring. It is trouble. A smart fridge, a smartphone, a smart city. They're not where we want to be, are they, Andrew?
Well, we're being sold the Brit card. It was the Brit card. And most people in my country would think that stands for the British card. It's very patriotic, but it's not. It's biometric registration, identification, and tracking. That's what it is. And they love telling us without telling us. But that's what it is.
Where did you stand on Andrew's idea, Catherine? For eliminating tax, because that's a major control of human beings gone. And
I agree.
Wow.
So so a financial transaction tax would work. One of the reasons it could work very well is the banking policies have encouraged an enormous amount of asset speculation. And even though it's a tiny tax, it would be enough to put a damper on that kind of speculation. So I do think I think the more you can simplify a tax and the more you can let a tax be universal and fair, which I think the financial transaction tax would be, I think it's a very good idea. You just have to make sure.
It can be modified so that, obviously, where there was a transaction abroad, you wouldn't have the receiving or sending back. You wouldn't have the receiving bank is not in our system because we can't do that to foreign banks. But you'd have to pay 0.5% if you were transacting out of the country. No charge to bring money into the country. My only concern about moving over and getting rid of every tax is the excise duties on tobacco and alcohol. I think probably, dropping cigarettes from £15 a packet to £4 overnight might not be the best thing. And dropping whiskey from 20 odd pounds a bottle to a £5 again might not be the most socially responsible thing. So I'd probably propose that we drop all of those by 20% a year for 5 years and have a monitoring system that was monitoring how social trends changed as a result of our actions. But as far as beer and wine, I'd just get rid of those straight away. They'd be much cheaper. And we get the pubs going again and get people actually interacting with each other and having a bit more of a community and a society again.
And that's a great way to get people talking offline. Catherine.
So one of my favorite documentaries, Andrew brought up the offshore havens. One of my favorite documentaries is John Christensen, and another great reporter made one called The Spider's Web, which I recommend. And it's on the offshore havens. And part of the challenge we've had, both in the UK and the US, is since 1998, the US has moved to massive violations of the financial management laws, and trillions of dollars have been moved out. And that trillions of dollars have been moved out on an illegal basis from government accounts. At the same time, the offshore havens, including the British offshore havens, exploded in assets. And what we're seeing is a dual system where insiders can engage in many behaviors, including avoiding taxes or not having transparency in offshore havens, and everybody onshore. It's a two-tiered system. And ultimately, if we're going to have a prosperous world, one of the things you see over long periods of time is that privilege is very destructive to economies. And because what happens is you get leadership that's good at engineering privilege, but they're not great at building wealth. So we have a terrible system of privilege of insiders, and the offshore havens have encouraged and facilitated a lot of that. And that has to be dealt with if we're going to get to real solutions too.
I remember my father at a school. I'll just quickly say this, Andrew. My father at a school had a headmaster who said, "Privilege breeds responsibility," and that was the fundamental tenet of his life. That if you have the privilege, you have a responsibility to your society to act decently, and that's what's gone out the window. Andrew, what were you going to say?
Well, that reminds me of, I think Colonel Smith in the Royal Marine Commandos said to me, "Mr. Bridgen, you're not better than anybody, than any of the men. You just have a more responsible job to do." You have to remember that. That was good advice. Well, yeah, I think that's what I like about the financial transaction tax. All these people who've taken these very, very expensive ways of avoiding paying their taxes, it just neutralises those straight away. If you want to transact in the UK, you've got to pay the transaction charges, and it'd be down to the banks to do that. The only exceptions would be if you had people who've got joint accounts, a number of accounts in the same names, in which case there'd be no charge for moving money between your own accounts, obviously. And we'd encourage cash, because the cash will be treated exactly the same as a transaction. So you withdraw cash from the bank, you pay 0.25%. You pay cash into the bank, you pay 0.25%. The only way of avoiding it was to deal totally in cash without going back through the banks. But I mean, for 0.25%, who wants to keep tens of thousands of pounds of cash in their house with all the inherent risk of that?
What was extraordinary, Catherine, about putting this forward in a little country of 5 million like New Zealand, I met people who almost said, govern me harder, don't take the manacles off, keep them on my wrists. They were going, couldn't you make it 10% tax? It was extraordinary, because it reminded me of stories I've read of the slaves in the plantations in America, who, when they were finally freed, many stayed on the plantations because they couldn't imagine that much freedom. So this goes back to the psychology.
We saw some of that. We saw some of that in the pandemic, where some people didn't want the lockdowns to end. Yes. So how do we move humanity to a place where we, if you like, grow metaphorically from being children looking up to a government to tell me what to do, mummy and daddy? It's kind of that energy with a government to, no, you are my servants. I'm a fully responsible adult, and I don't need much governance, actually. I don't need any of you. I went on the television. Obviously, I wasn't banned then during the pandemic itself. And 2 points I said was that I felt that these government measures, I was shocked that the British people were giving up freedoms so easily, freedoms that took hundreds of years to develop, but they were giving them up on the stroke of a pen. And that I accused the government of infantilizing the public. They're treating them like children. And that's what they want. That's what they want. They want loyal slaves.
Where did it come from in you, Catherine? Just that understanding, that adultness in you, that you're your own boss, that you drive your own ship, that people will not push you around and tell you what to do with illogical things. Was your father or grandfather, did they fight for your freedoms in the wars, or where was it with you?
So, I have to tell you, because I think achieving what we're talking about requires turning off the neurowarfare. I think people are ingesting massive amounts of electronic technology that influences what they think, what they feel,
Yes.
what they believe, and they're being electronically manipulated at a subconscious level. So I'll tell you a story. I told you, I overheard these two billionaires talking about entrainment technology and it scared me to death, because if you don't have your mind, if you don't have cognitive liberty, you have nothing. So I came home and that was it for me in TV. So it was 1984. I gave away my TV. I wouldn't watch the TV. And then, I just started to read, and I lived without a TV. In 2000, I did a speaking tour where I spoke in essentially every state in the United States, and then it was New Zealand, Sweden, England, countries around the world. And I would ask the audience, how many people here watch TV? And it was less than 10% in every state and every country. And I said, oh, that's my audience, people who don't watch TV. So, there's a big joke during COVID. Why did the Amish not get COVID? Because they don't have TVs. So I really think we have to we have to find a way to manage our interaction with media and electronics and smartphones and all these technologies. One, we have to know so when I was an investment advisor, this technology would be used to market financial fraud. And if you study financial fraud, what you'll find is a lot of people get tricked into investing their money with these kinds of techniques. And so, but I would literally find a client who you could buy silver at 2.5% over spot, but they wanted to pay 24% over spot. And I would have difficulty talking them out of it. My attitude was just buy silver at 2.5% over spot and give the rest to charity. Why give your money to fraudsters? So I think we need to know this technology exists, and we need to start to manage our interaction with it in a way where we're confident, that we do have cognitive independence and liberty.
Secondhand bookshops are an absolute treasure trove now. I think, I say to friends, go and collect as many good books on manuals for doing up old cars and all sorts of things. Good
but here's the
gardening.
other thing.
Yeah.
Stay outside as much as you can. Live in nature, go hug a tree. But if you're going to make important decisions, to me, it's very important that you do that offline. You don't do that on, you get away from this kind of technology or these kinds of influence. I just was reading an article. AT&T now says they have equipment that can read your thoughts. Now, I have no idea if that's true or not, but somebody's promoting that.
And Schwab has definitely indicated that. He said at one point, we will have technology where we won't need elections because we can predict how you'll vote. That is just shocking. That is
They've probably already decided they've put the propaganda so they know how you're going to vote. They're going to influence how you're going to vote. That's the problem.
So let's go back to Solari. And actually, before we do that, I do want to just mop up the issue of Trump. So where are you standing on Trump? You seem to be saying if people could get more healthy, then they wouldn't be so dependent on Trump, who himself is manacled. Yeah.
So whoever is the White House is a prisoner of the red button problem.
Wow.
Okay. So thinking that swinging back and forth between the uniparty is going to help doesn't make any sense. It's what Alex said. Don't have a discussion with the school board about changing their policies about a burning building. Trump is in a box, and that box is controlled by the economics. And if you want to, what I tell people, look, you need to know how to turn the red button green. You need to be able to push the red button in a way that makes us money, because then we can push the red button. And the way to look at it is in your neighborhood. How do you make sure the farmer gets a retail price and you get healthy food? You go direct and you cut out the intermediaries. How do you make sure you get healthcare practitioners who you can trust and get the retail price and you go direct? You're going to have to pay them cash. That's how it works. How do you build for yourself and your community the kind of future you want to live in, because you're dealing with providers and people that you can trust? You're going to have to build this one person, one household, and one community at a time. It can be done, but you're going to have to cut out, stop inviting into your life the companies and people who are trying to kill you. Stop needing them, stop depending on them, build a world without them, withdraw your support from them. And I will tell you, because the UK is the source of the word boycott. I mean, that's what happened. Was the most powerful political tactic, I think, in the world is shunning. And if you look at the power we have to withdraw our support for the machinery, support the people who are telling us the truth, whether they're politicians or media or doctors or farmers, and shift our time on money and attention, there could be a revolution. It's not too late.
That's profound. And of course, they want us to be shunned, ostracized, if we don't go along with all their digital world and their digital imprisonment. But we're not going to do that. Andrew, what would you add to what Catherine said? Such inspiring words.
Well, we're watching the mainstream media around the world is losing credibility. More and more people are doing their own research, to quote Jimmy Dore, and that's why alternative sources of news and media are thriving. And that's made the legacy media more reliant on its funding sources, which a lot of that are the forces who are conspiring against us. So they can't let go of that narrative, and they're in a doom loop. You can see why they're wanting to crack down on digital freedoms. We're going to get to the right solution as long as we can keep our freedom of speech, which is the fundamental freedom. Without that, there is no other freedom. And to have freedom of speech, you need freedom of thought. And to have freedom of thought, you need freedom of information, where you can gather and do your own research and gather the information and come to your own conclusions about matters. All of these freedoms are currently terribly under attack around the world because the powers that be, the vested interests, know that that's going to be their undoing. And that's why we have got to fight so hard to keep those freedoms. What we're seeing is freedoms around the world are being very quickly attempted to be replaced with privileges. And the problem with privileges is that privileges can be withdrawn if you don't behave yourself how those in power deem that you should.
There's one freedom above all else, and that is our freedom to have our relationship with the divine, Catherine. And I don't think it is fair to wrap up this discussion without referencing that, which you did so beautifully with Tucker. And you made such a profound point. You said divine intervention will come when we are humble enough to ask for that. I think there is a really crucial nexus for people to understand. In New Zealand here, we've been, since Helen Clark, she raced to get God out of everything in this country, raced to make it something you sneer about and deride and make people who believe in God weak. And that is changing around the world. It's a bit slow here, but definitely it's changing in America. So maybe we can finish with your words to people who are feeling desperate enough to get on their knees or just need to know there is some other force behind this spiritual war of good and evil, Catherine.
So I would say we can resonate with the divine or with the machine. That's what this is about. And so there's no middle of the road. You have to choose one or the other. And what I've found is the beauty of prayer is that when you don't know what to do or how to do it, or you're missing the insight you need, if you pray and ask for whatever help you need, it will come. And one of my favorite lines in scripture is the prayers of the righteous availeth much. So pray and pray for everybody in this situation. Pray for your enemies. I litigated with the Department of Justice for 11 years. I used to pray for them all the time. And I can't tell you what an effective tactic it was. It was amazing. So there's much that can be done with prayer. We have a great prayer book at Solari. You can download it in PDF form. We're happy to send you copies for free. We don't charge money for scripture. And there's a wonderful prayer in it. I don't know if you and Andrew know it. It's called the Deer's Cry. And it was, St. Patrick was said to pray when he would come and proselytize in Ireland to protect himself from the Druids. And it's a prayer that I use for periods of adversity. And it does wonders. But we're in a situation where, your choice is faith or fear, and you have to choose faith. Faith is where you get your power and where we find each other and get our power together. And the machine tries to put you in a fear, and it's another reason to decouple and reject the machine. Anything that's putting you in fear is not here to help you find real solutions. And if we're going to invent real solutions together, we have to do it through faith.
Which is redolent of Eleanor Roosevelt. Andrew, the final word to you. She said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that's really carried me through, along with good will win over evil and the truth shall set you free, which is a line from the Bible. But Andrew, your final words today.
Well, we are in a spiritual war. It's not about right and left. Those are the distractions of the uni party and the illusion of choice. It's about right and wrong. And many people have come to faith over the last few years, and that's because they've seen the evil that's being perpetrated against humanity, and they know in a universe of balance there has to be a compensating force, and that is correct. Prayer is very, very powerful. That's why it's banned in exclusion areas in the UK. Around various buildings. They're looking to expand it to other buildings as well, and that's because they are scared of us. And I'm very confident that God hasn't got us this far to desert us. And I've had some very, very personally hard times over the last few years since I spoke out, and that isn't God punishing me. That's God training me, and I thank Him for it.
What an incredible talk. What an incredible ending. Thank you both so much. And Alex Newman, if you're watching this, it was an honor to have you in this discussion earlier too. Please would everybody share this everywhere you can. This is a discussion to really help wake people up who haven't wanted to look in so far. They will follow this and they will join us. Thank you both.
God bless.
Thank you.
In the last part of this interview, Catherine Austin Fitz referred to a prayer which she called the Deer's Cry. It's also known as St. Patrick's Breastplate, and it's an ancient Celtic Christian prayer. It's a prayer for protection, and it invokes divine and natural forces to ward off evil. According to legend, St. Patrick and his monks were hidden from a hostile king because the king mistook the group for a herd of deer. That's how the name, the Deer's Cry, has come. The prayer seeks protection for the body and soul from various physical and spiritual threats. It is a prayer that seems appropriate at the end of this discussion of this grave threat to humanity's freedom. And we're adding it because we felt it's important to offer it as a way to find your own inner strength to stand up and say no to this digital prison which the globalists are trying to force on humanity around the world, to find the courage to say no, to find the strength to ward off their evil, and to know that there is protection there if you are willing to ask for it. So here it is, the Deer's Cry. I rise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness, of the Creator of creation. I rise today through the strength of Christ's birth, with his baptism, through the strength of his crucifixion, with his burial, through the strength of his resurrection, with his ascension, through the strength of his descent for the judgment of doom. I rise today through the strength of the love of the cherubim, in obedience of angels, in the service of archangels, in the hope of the resurrection to meet with reward, in the prayers of patriarchs, in prediction of prophets, in preaching of apostles, in faith of confessors, in innocence of holy virgins, in deeds of righteous men. I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak to me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me, God's host to save me from the snares of devils, from temptations of vices, from every one who shall wish me ill, afar and anear, alone and in a multitude. I summon today all these powers between me and those evils, against every cruel, merciless power that may oppose my body and soul, against incantations of false prophets, against black laws of pagandom, against false laws of heretics, against craft of idolatry, against spells of women and smiths and wizards, against every knowledge that corrupts man's body and soul. Christ, to shield me today against poisoning, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so there come to me abundance of reward. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in the eye of everyone that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness, of the Creator of creation. The power of that prayer is incredible, as you can feel, as you can hear, as you can witness. And it is our connection with God which the globalists have most tried to break, along with our family connections and our community connections. But above all, they fear our having a relationship with the divine, a direct experience of and relating to the source of all life, to the divine. If you would like to hear a sung version of this prayer, we'll put it in underneath this interview. I hope this brings you great comfort in these challenging and difficult times, which, as we've heard today in this interview, we will get through, but not without some turbulence. I hope this prayer helps to keep you also calm as it does me.